Kind what happens when an orc lives too long. They called me thorough. For 16 years I had cataloged Xenos specimens for the Ordo Xenos Biological Archives on Crassus Station, maintaining tissue samples, cross-referencing genetic markers, documenting physiological anomalies with precision that earned 3 commendations from Inquisitor Veyara herself. I believed my work served the Emperor's understanding of his enemies. I believed knowledge was our weapon against the alien. I believed the patterns I documented were scientific curiosities, nothing more. My name is Matthias Kell. I served as Senior Xenobiological Archivist, 3rd class, for 16 years and 4 months. And I want you to understand this. I saw the truth written in bone and sinew for over a decade before I understood what it meant. The archive occupied levels 9 through 14 of Crassus Station, a facility devoted entirely to the collection and study of Xenos biological materials. My section held Orkoid specimens exclusively. 17,240, 3 samples ranging from skin scrapings to complete skeletal structures. The temperature was maintained at precisely 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to preserve tissue indefinitely. Cold enough that my breath misted when I spoke the morning prayers to the machine spirits that powered our refrigeration units. The Emperor protects, and proper temperature control protects the Emperor's knowledge. I believed that then. My routine was sacred in its precision. I arrived each morning at the beginning of 6th hour, passed through 3 security checkpoints where armed Scutari verified my retinal patterns and genetic markers, descended via lift to level 11 where my primary workstation waited. The air smelled of counterseptic solutions and the faint metallic tang of preserved Xenos flesh, a smell I had long since stopped noticing. I would activate my data slate, review the processing queue, and begin the day's cataloging. Each specimen received a unique identifier, a tissue analysis, a morphological description, and cross-reference tags linking it to similar samples in the archive. I took pride in my accuracy. My error rate was 0.03%, lowest in my section. The orcs we studied came from battlefields across the segmentum obscurus, tissue samples extracted by Adeptus Astartes apothecaries or Imperial Guard Medica staff from fallen Xenos. Most were common specimens, warriors standing between 1.8 and 2.2 meters, musculature dense, but within documented parameters, cranial capacity averaging 800 cubic centimeters, standard greenskin physiology, dangerous in numbers, manageable individually, ultimately inferior to human discipline and faith. The Tactica Imperialis was clear on this point, and my 16 years of data supported it. Orcs were brutes, numerous, resilient, savage, but ultimately predictable. Animals with weapons. I married Celine in my 5th year of service. She worked in the administratum 3 levels above mine, processing logistics requests for the sector fleet. We lived in modest quarters in the residential section, attended chapel every 7th day, spoke prayers before meals. She found my work fascinating in an abstract way, the cataloging of Emperor's enemies from the safety of laboratory conditions. I never brought samples home, never spoke of the more disturbing specimens in detail. Our life was ordered, productive, faithful. We hoped for children once I achieved 4th class status and the associated increase in HAB space allocation. I believed I was building something permanent. The first unusual specimen arrived in my 9th year. Sample designation GS 9847, Theta. Skeletal fragments extracted from an orc warrior killed on Vorgus Prime by the Mortifactors chapter. The skull measured notably larger than standard parameters, 1,400 cubic centimeters, roughly 75% beyond average. The teeth showed unusual wear patterns, decades of accumulated damage and regrowth. The bone density exceeded normal ranges by a factor of 2.3. I noted these details in my report, flagged the sample as physiological outlier, possible genetic deviation, and filed it appropriately. Over the following months, similar specimens arrived with increasing frequency. A femur from Badlanding that suggested the creature had stood nearly 3 meters tall. Tissue samples from an orc on Gehenna, whose cellular regeneration rate was 40% faster than documented norms. A complete arm assembly from Cardis showing muscle fiber density that would have allowed lifting capacity beyond current theoretical models. I cataloged each one with meticulous care, noted the deviations, cross-referenced them against existing data. The pattern was there. I simply did not see it. In my 11th year, I received sample GS-123 Omega, and something changed. The shipment container was larger than usual, requiring 2 servitors to maneuver it into the processing bay. Inside was a complete skull, massive and scarred, taken from an orc designated as a warboss by the Cadian 117th who had killed it on Mordax. The creature had apparently led a warband numbering in the tens of thousands before finally falling to sustained las-cannon fire. The skull alone weighed 18 kilograms. The cranial capacity was 3,200 cubic centimeters, nearly 4 times the average human brain volume, approaching the cognitive capacity of some Adeptus Astartes augmentations. I held that skull in my gloved hands for a long time, feeling the weight of it, examining the scarring that covered every surface. Battle damage healed and re-healed, layer upon layer of trauma and recovery. The bone showed at least 70 distinct impact sites that had fractured and knitted back together. The teeth were worn nearly flat in some places, yet still functional, still growing. I performed a radiocarbon analysis of the deepest bone layers and received results that made me run the test 3 additional times to confirm accuracy. The creature had been at least 140 years old when it died. Possibly older. The orc had lived through campaigns that predated the current sector governor's birth. It had been fighting since before I was born, growing larger with each passing decade, each victory, each battle survived. And the skull showed no signs of cognitive degeneration. No brittleness that would suggest approaching natural death. If anything, the bone structure suggested continued growth, continued development. The warboss had not died of age. It had simply been finally killed. I filed my report with these findings, including the age estimate and the implications for understanding Orkoid life cycle extremes. I expected acknowledgement, perhaps curiosity from my superiors about such an unusual specimen. Instead, I received a terse response from departmental oversight instructing me to amend my report, remove the age estimate as speculative and beyond scope of assignment, and process the sample according to standard protocols. No explanation, no discussion, just compliance required. I amended the report as ordered. I was faithful, obedient, thorough. I believed my superiors had good reason for their instructions, that perhaps I had made an error in my calculations despite repeated confirmation. I wanted to believe that. But something had shifted. A small crack had appeared in my certainty, barely visible, easily ignored. I ignored it. The crack widened over the following year. I began noticing patterns in the archive I had somehow missed before, or perhaps had seen, but never connected. I started informally categorizing samples by the estimated age of the source specimen, using bone density and scarring as rough metrics. The results formed a clear curve. Younger orcs, those appearing to be under 20 years old, averaged 1.9 meters and 800 cubic centimeters. Specimens estimated at 40 to 60 years showed notable size increase, averaging 2.3 meters and 1,100 cubic centimeters. The few samples I could identify as likely exceeding a century showed dramatic escalation. 3 meters or more. Cranial capacity approaching or exceeding 2,000 cubic centimeters. There were not many of these ancient specimens, but they existed. Scattered through the archive like markers on a path I had walked without seeing where it led. I pulled files late one evening, after my assigned shift, when the archive was empty save for the servitors maintaining environmental controls. Sample after sample told the same story. The orcs grew, not just physically, but mentally. The skulls enlarged to accommodate expanding neural capacity. The bone showed structural changes that suggested not simple enlargement, but architectural reorganization. Evolution in real time. Driven by survival and victory, I found 17 specimens that showed this extreme development. 17 specimens from 17 separate war zones spanning 7 decades of Imperial records. 17 orcs that had lived long enough to become something beyond the standard profile. Something that exceeded the parameters we taught in tactical briefings and strategy assessments. And every single file had been flagged with the same notation in the classification field. Restricted dissemination. Ordo Xenos internal only. Theological implications. Do not publish. Theological implications. The phrase made no sense to me initially. What theology was at stake in understanding how long an orc could live and what it became? We studied Xenos to destroy them more efficiently. Knowledge served the Imperium's survival. That was doctrine, clear and unambiguous. I read the phrase 17 times across 17 files, and each time my confusion deepened. Why would the departmental oversight care about theological implications of Xenos biology? Why restrict this information from tactical dissemination to forces fighting these creatures? I should have stopped there. Faith would have meant accepting that my superiors understood things beyond my clearance, that the Inquisition had reasons I could not comprehend. But the crack had widened enough that I saw what waited beyond it. Saw the question forming that I did not want to ask. If these ancient orcs existed, if they grew to such extremes, why did tactical doctrine not account for them? Why did the Tactica Imperialis make no mention of warbosses that could think with near-human intelligence, that could plan campaigns across decades, that commanded through something beyond animal cunning? The files told me where the specimens came from, the campaigns where these creatures had been killed. I had access to the military archive through my security clearance, authorization to cross, reference Xenos samples with battle reports for contextual documentation. I began pulling those reports during my off hours, reading the accounts of the campaigns that had finally brought down these ancient warlords. Vorgus Prime, Bad Landing, Gehenna, Cardis, Mordax, 17 war zones, 17 extended campaigns. The pattern emerged slowly, each report adding another piece. The Mordax campaign had lasted 18 years. 18 years to kill one orc warboss and shatter its warband. The Imperial Guard had committed 7 regiments. The Adeptus Astartes had deployed elements of 2 chapters for the final assault, and the Navy had maintained orbital blockade for over a decade. Casualties exceeded 400,000 Imperial personnel. 400,000 lives to kill one Xenos and its followers. Bad Landing had required 12 years and 3 regiments. Cardis, 9 years and siege warfare that reduced 2 cities to rubble. Gehenna, 22 years and the eventual authorization of exterminatus to prevent the orc from unifying the entire subsector's greenskin populations. Exterminatus. We had sterilized a planet rather than allow the creature to continue existing. I read the authorization, signed by an Inquisitor Lord whose name was redacted, and the justification was stark. Subject demonstrates strategic planning capability and tactical adaptation beyond acceptable Xenos parameters. Conventional military resolution probability assessed at less than 30% over 50-year projection. Extreme sanction authorized. 17 campaigns. Collectively, they had cost the Imperium over 2 million lives, dozens of regiments, hundreds of ships, resources that could have fought multiple smaller incursions. And all of this to kill orcs that, according to official doctrine, should not have been possible. Orcs did not live that long in sustained warfare. Orcs did not develop intelligence approaching human levels. Orcs did not plan campaigns or adapt tactics or learn from defeat. These were certainties I had been taught, had believed, had seen confirmed in thousands of specimens that fit the expected profile. Except these 17 had not fit the profile. These 17 had become something else, had evolved through the simple virtue of surviving long enough, fighting long enough, winning enough. And the Imperium had hidden this fact, restricted it, marked it with theological implications, and moved forward as though nothing challenged the comfortable narrative of Xenos' inferiority. I began having trouble sleeping. Celine noticed, asked if something troubled me at work. I told her the archive was understaffed, that processing queues were longer than usual. She accepted this, concerned but not alarmed. How could I explain to her what I was beginning to comprehend? That the enemies we called brutes might, given time and survival, become something that justified planetary destruction to stop. That the Imperium knew this and chose not to share it with the forces fighting these creatures. That knowledge, which could save lives, was classified under theological restrictions I did not understand. The theological phrase haunted me. I finally understood I needed to speak with someone who had the clearance and context to explain what I had found, or to tell me I had misunderstood. I requested an audience with Inquisitor Viara, citing urgent classification questions regarding archived specimens. I expected delay, bureaucratic processing, perhaps a response from a subordinate. Instead, I received approval within 2 hours and instructions to report to her personal chambers on Level 3 at the beginning of 8th hour the following morning. I arrived precisely on time, passing through security protocols that scanned not just my body, but my recent activities, my data, slate access logs, probably my heart rate and stress hormones. The Inquisitor's chambers were spare and cold, furnished with a desk of dark wood, walls lined with actual books, physical codices rather than data storage. She sat behind the desk, a woman of perhaps 60 years, though augmentation made age difficult to assess, wearing the simple robes of the Ordo Xenos, with the inquisitorial rosette at her collar. Her augmetic left eye whirred softly as it focused on me, a sound I had heard before in the archive's older servitors. She gestured to a chair facing her desk. I sat. She studied me for a long moment, her biological eye dark and tired, her augmetic eye flickering with data overlays I could not see. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, absolutely devoid of warmth. Archivist Kell, you have been accessing restricted files outside your assigned processing queue. Military campaign reports. Cross-referencing Xenos specimens with tactical assessments. You understand, this is monitored. I had not known it was monitored with such specificity, though I should have expected it. I nodded, found my voice. Yes, Inquisitor. I apologize for any protocol violation. I was seeking context for unusual specimens in my care, attempting to understand classification notations I encountered. Her expression did not change. Theological implications. You encountered this notation on 17 files documenting extreme development Orkoid specimens. You wish to understand why biological data carries theological restrictions. Is this accurate? The precision of her knowledge should have terrified me. Instead, I felt an odd relief that I would finally receive explanation. Yes, Inquisitor. I do not understand why information about Xenos longevity and development potential would be theologically sensitive. It seems tactically relevant to forces engaging these creatures. She closed her eyes. breathed slowly. When she opened them again, something in her expression had shifted, fatigue showing through the professional mask. Archivist Kell, you have served with distinction for 16 years. Your accuracy is exceptional. Your faith, until recently, was unquestioned. I am going to explain something to you, and then I am going to offer you a choice. What I tell you cannot be forgotten. Do you understand? I understood nothing, except that I had reached a threshold I could not uncross. I nodded. She stood, walked to one of the bookcases, removed a bound volume of Imperial military doctrine. She opened it to a marked page and set it before me. The text was dense, formal, centuries old. A passage was highlighted in faded ink. I read it slowly. The Xenos is inferior to humanity in all measures that matter. It lacks our faith, our discipline, our divine purpose. Where it shows cunning, this is animal instinct. Where it shows coordination, this is hive response. The Xenos does not think as we do, does not plan as we do, does not aspire as we do. To suggest otherwise is to diminish humanity's manifest supremacy in the Emperor's design. I looked up at her. She was watching me with that same exhausted expression. This is foundational doctrine, Archivist. Written 2,000 years ago by War Master Kairos during the Great Crusade. It underpins every tactical assessment, every strategic analysis, every soldier's understanding of who they fight and why victory is certain. Humanity is supreme. The Xenos is inferior. This is not merely tactical assessment. It is theological truth. The crack that had formed months ago shattered completely. I understood. But the Orks that live long enough become intelligent. They develop strategic thinking. They become threats requiring massive resource commitment to eliminate. This contradicts the foundational doctrine. She nodded slowly. Now you see the theological implication. If an Ork can live for a century and develop intelligence approaching human levels, if it can plan and adapt and learn, then it is not truly inferior. It is simply usually short-lived, given time, given survival. It becomes something that challenges our supremacy. And if that is true of Orks, what else might be true of other Xenos? What does that mean for the doctrine that justifies our galaxy, spanning crusade against alien life? The words hung in the cold air between us. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and uneven. The archive around us hummed with refrigeration units preserving 17,000 specimens, 17 of which proved the doctrine was, at minimum, incomplete, possibly false. Why not simply revise the doctrine? The question came out before I could stop it, naive and desperate. Why not teach tactical forces about this potential, prepare them for what they might face? She returned to her desk, sat heavily, and for the first time I saw her hands were shaking slightly. She folded them together as if in prayer, steadying them through discipline. Because humanity is losing, Archivist Kell. We have been losing for 10,000 years. We hold through faith and fear and the absolute certainty that we are righteous, that our cause is just, that the Emperor's vision is correct. Take away that certainty, introduce doubt about our superiority, and the entire structure fractures. A guardsman facing an Ork needs to believe he fights an animal that can be killed. Tell him the creature might have lived for decades and learned from every battle, that it might think and plan and adapt, and you introduce hesitation. Hesitation kills. Faith wavers. So we lie, I said. My voice sounded distant, as if someone else spoke with my mouth. We classify the truth and let soldiers die in ignorance rather than risk them questioning doctrine. Her augmetic eye focused on me with sudden intensity, clicking and adjusting. Preserve humanity's survival by maintaining the certainty that makes sacrifice possible. Do you think this is the only truth that is carefully managed? The Imperium functions because people believe. They believe the Emperor protects, that the Imperium is necessary, that humanity is supreme, that their suffering has meaning and purpose. Truth without context is poison. It destroys faster than any Xenos weapon. I thought of Selene, praying before meals, trusting that our lives serve the Imperium's great purpose. I thought of the soldiers who died on Mordax, fighting for 18 years against a creature whose intelligence they were never told to respect, to truly fear. I thought of my own 16 years cataloging evidence of a truth that was systematically suppressed, my precision and accuracy serving to document lies we told ourselves. How many? I asked. How many Orks reach this level of development? She consulted a data slate, though I suspected she already knew. Current estimates suggest approximately 1 in every 100,000 Orks survives long enough to show significant development beyond base parameters. Of those, perhaps 1 in 10 reaches the true extremes you have documented. The oldest confirmed specimen we have record of was killed 3 centuries ago by Saint Corinus himself. It had led campaigns for over 200 years. It spoke Low Gothic fluently and had begun teaching it to its subordinates. We do not publicize the saint's final battle accurately. 1 in a million. Rare enough to be exceptional. Common enough that every few years another ancient warboss emerged somewhere in the Imperium and required years or decades to eliminate. Rare enough to hide, common enough to be constant threat, and each one proved the doctrine was wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. What is my choice? I knew there was a choice. She had said there would be a choice. I already knew what it would be, though I hoped I was wrong. Inquisitor Viara looked at me with eyes that had clearly made this offer before. That carried the weight of previous responses. You can continue your service with full understanding of what you document and why classification exists. You will be promoted to 4th class with appropriate clearance to access restricted analysis. You will continue faithful service to the Imperium with knowledge of the complexity we manage. You will never speak of this to anyone lacking clearance, including your wife, your colleagues, anyone. You will carry this truth and protect others from it. She paused, hand moving to a drawer in her desk. I knew what waited in that drawer even before she opened it. I had seen enough, read enough, understood enough. Or you can refuse this burden. Refuse to serve the Imperium while knowing its methods of preserving faith through selective truth. I will not kill you, Archivist Kell. I am not a monster, but you will be transferred to a penal colony world in the outer sectors. Your marriage will be annulled. Your name will be struck from the service rolls. You will live out your remaining years in manual labor, knowing truth but unable to serve with it. You will be true to yourself and useless to humanity. The choice was not between good and evil. It was between complicity with knowledge or purity without purpose. I could be part of the machine that preserved humanity through careful lies, or I could be discarded with my truth intact, but meaningless. There was no option where I fought to change the system, to demand transparency, to argue for reform. The system was larger than me, older than me, had survived by these precise methods for millennia. One archivist's conscience was not enough weight to shift it even slightly. I thought of Selene. I thought of the life we had built, the children we hoped for, the modest comfort of faith, without complexity that had satisfied me for 34 years. I thought of the soldiers dying in ignorance on 1,000 battlefields, fighting enemies they did not truly understand, because understanding might make them hesitate. I thought of the Imperium stretching across the galaxy, billions of humans holding together through shared certainty, shared faith, shared lies that made the unbearable bearable. If I accept, I said slowly, if I continue service with this knowledge, what purpose does my work serve? What is the point of cataloging truth that will never be shared? She almost smiled. Though there was no humor in it, cataloging means we have accurate data when we need it. When another ancient warboss emerges, we know what forces to commit, how long the campaign will likely require, what strategies might work based on previous eliminations. Knowledge serves the Inquisition even when it cannot serve the broader Imperium. Your work matters, Archivist. It simply matters in ways that are not publicized. I wanted to ask if she slept well, carrying this and whatever other truths she managed. I wanted to ask how many people she had given this choice to, and how many had chosen complicity versus exile. I wanted to ask if the Imperium she preserved was worth preserving with these methods. But I already knew she did not sleep well, that many had chosen and many had refused. That she questioned this constantly, but continued because someone had to carry the burden, and she would not pass it to another who might be less careful, less anguished, less human about it. I need time, I said. I need to think about this. She nodded. You have until the end of this shift to decide. Return here at the beginning of 16th hour with your answer. Do not discuss this with anyone. Do not access any additional files. Think carefully, Archivist Kell. This is the most important decision you will make. I left her chambers and walked through the station's corridors without seeing them, descended to my hab quarters and found Celine preparing our evening meal. The routine comfort of domestic life surrounding me like armor I could no longer wear. She smiled when I entered, asked about my day. I told her it had been long, complex, that I was tired. She accepted this, concerned but trusting. I watched her move through our small kitchen, faithful and certain, her world uncomplicated by knowledge of what truths were managed and suppressed for her protection. I could tell her. I could explain everything I had learned, shatter her certainty as mine had been shattered, make her carry this weight with me. Partnership in truth. But that would be cruelty, not honesty. She would gain nothing but anguish, would lose the peace that ignorance allowed. I would be asking her to suffer for no purpose, except that I wanted company in my suffering. That was selfishness wearing the mask of intimacy. I could accept the Inquisitor's offer. Continue my work with fuller understanding. Serve the Imperium's preservation of human survival through careful management of what people knew and believed. I would be part of the machinery of controlled truth, documenting evidence that would be used selectively, never fully shared. I would lie by omission every day, to Celine, to colleagues, to everyone below my clearance. But I would be useful. My work would matter in the shadows where decisions were made. Or I could refuse. Maintain my integrity, reject complicity. Accept exile to a penal colony where I would break rocks or process, or until age or accident took me. I would be true to myself and absolutely useless to anyone. My knowledge would die with me in obscurity, serving no one, changing nothing, meaning nothing except as personal martyrdom for principles that the Imperium would continue ignoring. There was a fourth option, though Inquisitor Viera had not mentioned it. I could take what I knew and try to spread it, try to force the truth into wider awareness, despite classification and restriction. I could become a dissident, a voice crying truth in a system built to suppress it. The thought lasted perhaps 3 seconds before I acknowledged its futility. I had no platform, no authority, no means to reach anyone who mattered. I would be disappeared within days, vanished into inquisitorial custody, and the truth would die with me more completely than if I simply accepted exile, martyrdom without even the satisfaction of witness. I ate the meal Celine prepared, spoke of nothing important, lay beside her that night, and felt the vast distance between us even as our bodies touched. She slept peacefully, her breathing even and calm. I stared at the ceiling and understood that innocence was a luxury I had lost, that I could never return to comfortable certainty even if I tried. The crack had become a chasm, and I stood on its edge looking down at truths that offered no comfort, no resolution, only the choice between different forms of compromise. Morning came too quickly and too slowly. I rose before Celine woke, dressed in my archivist robes, descended through the station to Level 11 for what might be the final time. The archive hummed around me, 17,000 specimens preserved at 4 degrees Celsius. 17 of them whispering truths that would never be widely shared. I walked among them, reading the designation tags, remembering the day each arrived and the care I had taken documenting them. Faithful service. Meticulous accuracy. Serving truth in service of lies. At the beginning of 16th hour, I returned to Inquisitor Veyara's chambers. She was waiting, looking as tired as I felt, her augmetic eye tracking me as I entered. I sat in the same chair as before. She did not speak, simply waited for my answer. "I accept," I said. The words felt like ashes in my mouth. "I will continue my service with full understanding. I will carry this burden and protect others from it. I will be complicit." Relief flickered across her face, quickly suppressed. She had hoped I would choose this, I realized. Had wanted me to remain useful. To join the ranks of those who knew and managed truth instead of being discarded. It was not cruelty that had shaped her offer. It was exhaustion and the hope that someone else would share the weight she carried. "You will be promoted to 4th class immediately," she said, her voice taking on formal cadence. "You will receive expanded clearance and access to classified analysis protocols. You will report directly to me on matters of unusual significance. You will maintain absolute discretion regarding all restricted information. Do you accept these terms?" "I accept." She produced a data slate and had me verify my identity and consent with biometric signature. The transaction was complete in moments. I was now complicit by choice and record, bound by oaths and clearance to serve truth selectively, to protect humanity by lying to it, to be useful at the cost of integrity. I had chosen service over principle, utility over purity, the Imperium's survival over my own peace. "You will struggle with this," Inquisitor Veyara said quietly, setting aside the data slate. "You will question whether you made the right choice. You will lie awake at night wondering if there was another way. There was not. There is never another way. The only choice is whether to carry the burden or refuse it, and refusal serves no one. You made the choice that serves humanity, Archivist. I pray it brings you some measure of peace eventually." I doubted it would, but I nodded, thanked her, and left her chambers to return to my work. The archive waited, temperature maintained at 4 degrees, specimens preserved for study that would inform decisions made in shadows. I had 16 years of faithful service behind me. I would have, however, many years remained ahead of me, service with knowledge, precision without innocence, accuracy in documenting truths I would never fully share. Celine noticed my promotion that evening, congratulated me with genuine joy, spoke excitedly about the increased HAB, space allocation, and what it meant for our hopes of children. I smiled and held her and said nothing about the price of advancement, the choice I had made, the burden I now carried. She did not need to know. The Imperium required some to know and most to believe. And my choice meant I had joined those who knew and protected those who believed. Over the following months, I accessed the restricted analysis protocols my new clearance permitted. I learned the techniques used to eliminate ancient Ork warbosses, the strategic assessments that calculated when conventional warfare remained viable, versus when extreme sanction was required. I learned that the 17 specimens I had identified were merely the ones we had managed to recover tissue from. Estimates suggested twice that number had been eliminated over the past century without sufficient remains for archival documentation. Every few years another appeared, another campaign spanning years or decades to bring it down, another calculated expenditure of Imperial lives to eliminate a threat we officially claimed did not exist at that level of danger. I learned that other Xenos showed similar potential for development, beyond parameters when allowed sufficient longevity. The Tyranids had organisms that, if not destroyed quickly, evolved mid-conflict in ways that made them exponentially more dangerous. The Necrons had lords who had existed for millions of years and thought in timescales that made human strategy look like childish impulse. The Aldari had individuals who had lived through humanity's birth as a spacefaring species and remembered when we were considered primitive newcomers. Every threat the Imperium faced could become worse with time, and humanity's greatest advantage was killing threats quickly, efficiently, before they developed to their full potential. But doctrine could not say this. Doctrine required absolute confidence in human supremacy, in the Xenos as inferior creatures that simply outnumbered us. To admit they could develop, evolve, become more dangerous with survival was to admit humanity might not be supreme, might simply be young and fortunate and surviving through aggression rather than inherent superiority. That admission would corrode faith, introduce doubt, make every battlefield a question instead of a certainty. So we managed truth. We classified what challenged doctrine. We preserved evidence in archives like mine and used it selectively where needed while ensuring the broader Imperium never faced questions it could not afford to answer. And I became part of this machinery, documenting specimens with full knowledge of what they represented and what would never be said about them. Useful, complicit, necessary. I am 62 years old now. I have served as senior Xenobiological Archivist, 4th class, for over 2 decades. Celine and I raised 2 children in our expanded HAB quarters, both now serving the Imperium in their own capacities, neither knowing what truths their father documents. I have cataloged over 40,000 specimens total, 30, one of which show the extreme development that proves doctrine is, at minimum, dangerously incomplete. I have written restricted analysis reports that informed 3 separate campaign strategies against ancient Ork warbosses, calculations of resource commitment and probability of success that helped eliminate threats before they could grow further. My work has saved lives by helping kill enemies efficiently. My work has also preserved lies that let soldiers die without knowing what they truly faced. I do not sleep well. I have not slept well for decades. I lie awake and think of the guardsmen fighting orcs on distant worlds, believing they face brutes when they might be facing creatures with strategic intelligence, planning capability, decades or centuries of combat experience. I think of the pilots bombing orc positions, confident in human superiority, never told that the warlord organizing those positions might think as well as any human general. I think of the children in Scala facilities learning that Xenos are inferior, learning certainty that will serve them in combat, but might also kill them through underestimation. And I think of Inquisitor Veyara, long dead now, her position filled by Inquisitor Hask, who carries the same burden with the same exhausted eyes. I think of all the archivists and analysts and administrators who know these truths and manage them, who serve the Imperium by lying to it, who carry knowledge that would destroy faith if widely shared. We are complicit. We are necessary. We are damned by our usefulness. The Imperium functions through faith maintained by selective truth. I understand this now in ways I could not comprehend 20 years ago when I first sat in Inquisitor Veyara's chambers and made my choice. The system is not corrupt. The system is not broken. The system functions exactly as designed, preserving humanity through methods that would horrify humanity if fully understood. We who know serve those who believe, protecting them from truths that would destroy the certainty that makes sacrifice possible. Was I right to accept this burden? I do not know. I have never known. But someone must catalog these specimens, must document these truths, must provide the Inquisition with accurate data when decisions are made about how to respond to threats. If I had refused, another would have taken my place, and I cannot know if they would have carried the weight with as much care, as much anguish, as much remaining humanity as I have tried to maintain. My suffering serves no one, but my service might. That calculation is the only comfort I have found. The archive maintains temperature at 4 degrees Celsius. Now 23,000 specimens and growing. Evidence of truths carefully managed. I arrive each morning at the beginning of 6th hour, pass through security protocols, descend to level 11, and continue the work of documenting what must never be fully shared. But something has changed. 3 months ago, a specimen arrived that violated every parameter I had documented in my decades of service. Sample designation GS22847 alpha. A complete skeleton, intact neurological tissue preserved in stasis fields, extracted from an orc killed on Golgotha by the Grey Knights themselves. The involvement of the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus was unusual enough. The specimen's characteristics were unprecedented. The creature had stood 4.7 meters tall. The skull measured over 5,000 cubic centimeters, larger than any specimen in our records. The bone showed battle damage spanning what preliminary analysis suggested was at least 3 centuries of continuous warfare. 3 centuries. The teeth were worn completely flat in some areas, yet showed active growth in others. Continuous regeneration across a lifespan that exceeded any documented case. But it was the neural tissue that shattered my understanding completely. The brain had been extracted intact, preserved in specialized stasis gel that maintained cellular integrity at the moment of death. Inquisitor Hask ordered immediate analysis, priority override, all other work suspended. I spent 6 weeks examining that tissue with every instrument in the archive, every analysis protocol available. The neural structure showed organization that approached human complexity. Pattern recognition centers that exceeded human norms, memory encoding structures that suggested retention and learning capability beyond anything we had attributed to Orkoid neurology. The creature had been intelligent, not cunning, not clever in animal ways, but genuinely intelligent in cognitive terms approaching or possibly exceeding human baseline. It had been killed not through conventional warfare, but through specialized Grey Knights deployment. Psychic assault combined with overwhelming force, because nothing less would suffice. The after-action report I received with restricted clearance was stark in its assessment. The Orc had commanded a warband numbering over 200,000, had coordinated multi-year campaigns across 4 systems, had demonstrated tactical adaptation that suggested it learned from every engagement and modified its approach accordingly. Most disturbing was a detail buried in the appendices of the Grey Knights report. The creature had spoken High Gothic during the final battle, had addressed the Grey Knights by name and rank, had offered tactical analysis of the battle as it progressed, speaking conversationally even as psychic assault tore at its mind. The Grey Knight Justicar who filed the report noted that the Orc's final words, spoken as the killing blow fell, were, "I learned much from you, brother. My successors will learn more." Successors. The creature understood succession, understood teaching, understood legacy. It had been preparing the Orks under its command to continue learning, adapting, improving even after its death. This was not animal behavior. This was civilization in its earliest, most brutal form. Given another century, what might that creature have built? What might it have taught? I filed my analysis with Inquisitor Hask and requested a meeting. She granted it immediately, and I found myself once again in chambers similar to those where Inquisitor Veyara had offered me a choice 2 decades earlier. Hask was younger than Veyara had been, perhaps 40 years old, but her eyes carried the same exhaustion, the same weight of managed truths. She had clearly read my report in full. "Your assessment is accurate," she said without preamble. "The specimen represents the most extreme example of Orkoid development we have ever documented. It also represents our most severe classification concern. This information cannot be disseminated even within standard restricted channels. It is now classified under Obsidian-level protocols. You myself, and perhaps 6 others in the entire segmentum, have access to the full analysis." I had expected this, but hearing the confirmation still felt like a door closing. Why show me the specimen at all? Why not handle analysis at higher clearance levels? She regarded me steadily. "Because you are the best Xenobiological Archivist in the sector, and I needed your expertise to confirm what I feared. And because you have served faithfully for 2 decades with knowledge of how truth is managed. You understand why this must be restricted. I trust you to continue serving in that understanding." "What happens now?" I asked. "What do we do with evidence that an Ork can become this intelligent, this capable, this dangerous, if allowed sufficient longevity?" Hask stood, walked to her window overlooking the station's docking bays. Ships came and went, transporting materials and personnel across the sector, the machinery of imperial logistics grinding forward endlessly. She spoke without turning. "We continue exactly as we have. We classify this evidence. We ensure tactical forces receive protocols for identifying and eliminating high-value targets quickly, before they can develop to this level. We maintain doctrinal confidence in human supremacy, while secretly preparing for exceptions, and we pray to the Emperor that we eliminate these threats faster than they can emerge." "But this one existed for 3 centuries, I said. 3 centuries of warfare, and we did not know it existed until it had become this developed. How many others are out there right now, growing, learning, becoming threats that will require Grey Knight's deployment to stop?" She turned back to me, and I saw something in her expression I had not seen in Inquisitor Veyara all those years ago: fear. Genuine, existential fear, barely controlled. I estimate between 12 and 20 currently active warbosses have existed for over a century. Between 3 and 7 may have existed for over 2 centuries. We are tracking them where possible, preparing response protocols, calculating when conventional force will no longer suffice. But the Imperium is vast, Archivist. The Orks are innumerable. We cannot find them all before they become threats. We can only respond when they reveal themselves, and by then they have already grown dangerous enough to warrant our attention. The mathematics of it settled over me like physical weight. Millions of Orks across thousands of battlefields. A tiny fraction surviving long enough to develop significantly, but that tiny fraction still numbering in the dozens or hundreds across the Imperium at any given time. Ancient warlords commanding armies, learning from every battle, growing more capable with every year. And the Imperium's response was to classify their existence, maintain doctrinal confidence in Xeno's inferiority, and hope that tactical forces could eliminate threats before they reached the levels that required specialized intervention. "We're losing," I said quietly. Not a question, a realization. Hask's expression did not change. "We have been losing for 10,000 years. We lose slowly, gradually, holding through faith and fear, and the willingness to spend lives for temporary victories. The Orks grow stronger with time if allowed to survive. The Tyranids adapt faster than we can develop countermeasures. The Necrons cannot be permanently killed. The forces of chaos corrupt from within. We face extinction on every front, and we survive through constant warfare, constant sacrifice, constant faith that the Emperor will somehow provide deliverance. She returned to her desk, sat heavily, but faith requires certainty. Soldiers must believe victory is possible, that their sacrifice matters, that humanity is supreme and will eventually triumph. Remove that certainty, and the structure collapses faster than any Xenos invasion could destroy it. So we manage truth. We preserve faith. We document evidence like your specimen in archives, where it can inform tactical decisions without destroying morale. And we pray that this is enough. I thought of my children, both serving the Imperium in their own ways, faithful and certain in ways I could never return to being. I thought of Celine, decades married to me, never knowing the truths I carried. I thought of billions of humans across the Imperium, fighting and dying and sacrificing in the certainty that their suffering served humanity's eventual triumph. What would happen if they all knew what I knew? That we were not supreme, merely numerous and desperate. That our enemies could become more dangerous with time, while we could only spend lives to hold the line. The Imperium would shatter, faith would crumble. The machinery of sacrifice that sustained human civilization would seize and fail. We would tear ourselves apart faster than any external enemy could manage. The truth would kill us more efficiently than lies ever had. I understand, I said finally. I will maintain Obsidian-level classification. The specimen will be documented with full analysis, available only to those with appropriate clearance. The broader archive will receive standard notation, unusually large specimen, tactical relevance minimal, no theological implications. Hask nodded slowly. You have served with distinction for 22 years, Archivist Kell. You have maintained faith while carrying truths that would break lesser servants. I am promoting you to 3rd class, effective immediately. You will have access to all classified xenobiological analyses across the sector. You will provide strategic assessment for inquisitorial planning regarding Xenos threat escalation. Your expertise is too valuable to remain solely archival. A promotion, more responsibility, deeper complicity. I would now not only document truth, but actively participate in deciding how it was used, what was shared, what remained hidden. I would be further from innocence, further from the person I had been, further from any possibility of claiming ignorance as mitigation. I was being elevated because I had proven capable of serving the system that required lies to function. I accept, I said. What else could I say? Refuse and be exiled? My knowledge wasted. Accept and become more deeply integrated into the machinery of managed truth. The choice was not really a choice. It was an acknowledgement of the trajectory I had been on since the day I agreed to continue service 2 decades ago. I left Hask's chambers and returned to the archive. The specimen waited in its preservation chamber. 5,000 cubic centimeters of neural tissue that had once thought complex thoughts, planned campaigns, spoken high Gothic, understood succession and legacy. Evidence that Orks were not inherently inferior, merely usually short-lived. Evidence that would never be widely shared, that would inform tactical planning in shadows while doctrine maintained comfortable lies. That night I lay beside Celine and felt the distance between us more acutely than ever. She breathed peacefully, her faith intact, her worldview uncomplicated by knowledge of what her husband documented and suppressed. I had protected her from this truth, just as the Imperium protected billions from truths They could not afford to know. I was complicit in her ignorance as I was complicit in the system's lies. Useful, necessary, damned. The years continued. I rose to 3rd class, then 2nd class, eventually senior xenobiological analyst with authority spanning multiple sectors. I reviewed classified analyses from across the segmentum, provided strategic assessment on Xenos threat escalation, helped calculate when conventional warfare would suffice versus when extreme sanction was required. I became an expert in managed truth, in determining what knowledge served the Imperium and what knowledge would destroy it. I reviewed after-action reports from hundreds of campaigns, saw patterns emerge across decades of warfare. The Orks that survived longest became most dangerous not just physically but organizationally. They built coalitions, coordinated across vast distances, demonstrated strategic patience that belied their reputation for mindless aggression. The truly ancient ones, those that survived for centuries, became threats that required specialized response. Grey Knight's deployment, exterminatus authorization, resources that could fight multiple smaller wars redirected to eliminate single targets. And always, the official narrative maintained that these were exceptional cases, aberrations, not representative of Xenos capability. Tactical briefings acknowledged the existence of powerful warbosses, but attributed their danger to size and followers, not intelligence or planning. The possibility that Orks could think, learn, adapt was never included in doctrine. Soldiers fought with confidence in Xenos inferiority, and that confidence made them willing to engage in battles they might refuse if they understood what they truly faced. I calculated once, during a sleepless night, the number of Imperial lives that might have been saved if tactical doctrine honestly acknowledged Orkoid development potential. If forces knew to prioritize elimination of older warbosses, to recognize the signs of veteran leaders, to understand that Orks became more dangerous with survival. The number was significant. Tens of thousands across the decades I had served, possibly hundreds of thousands across the centuries since the Great Crusade. But I also calculated the cost of that honesty, the hesitation it would introduce, the questions soldiers would ask about what else doctrine lied about, the erosion of faith that followed from acknowledging we were not inherently supreme, merely currently more numerous and better organized. The collapse of certainty that made sacrifice meaningful. That number was incalculable, potentially billions if faith shattered across multiple sectors. So the lies were justified. Not morally justified, perhaps, but pragmatically necessary. Humanity survived through faith, and faith required certainty, and certainty required selective truth. I had become an instrument of that selection, determining what knowledge served and what knowledge destroyed. I was useful. I was necessary. I was complicit. Celine died in my 58th year, a quick illness that the Medica could not resolve despite their efforts. I held her hand in her final hours, listening to her speak prayers she had recited her entire life, watching her face peaceful in the certainty that the Emperor protected and her service had meaning. She died faithful, ignorant, protected from truths that would have offered her nothing except anguish. I had preserved her innocence until the end. I told myself this was kindness. Perhaps it was cowardice. I would never know which. My children both serve in positions I helped secure through my rank and connections. My son is a naval logistics officer, managing supply chains for sector fleet operations. My daughter is an administratum analyst, processing personnel assignments for guard regiments. Neither knows what their father truly does, what knowledge he carries, what truths he suppresses for the Imperium's benefit. They are faithful, certain, useful in their ignorance. I preserved their innocence as I preserved their mothers, perpetuating the cycle of selective truth across generations. I am 71 years old now. My body is failing augmentation and medication maintaining functionality that would otherwise have ceased. I have perhaps a decade remaining if the Medicare assessments are accurate. I have served the Imperium for nearly 5 decades, the majority of my life spent in service of managed truth. I have documented over 60,000 specimens, 93 of which prove that Xenos can develop beyond the parameters doctrine acknowledges. I have reviewed classified analysis from hundreds of campaigns, provided strategic assessment that influenced resource allocation, helped decide which truths to preserve and which to suppress. I have been useful. I have been necessary. I have been complicit in a system that preserves humanity through lies, that maintains faith by managing knowledge, that sacrifices innocence to preserve order. And I have never known, not once in nearly 50 years of service, whether this was right, whether the cost of truth was truly greater than the cost of lies, whether humanity's survival justified the methods required to achieve it. But I know this: if I had refused Inquisitor Veyara's offer 5 decades ago, if I had chosen exile over complicity, my conscience would be cleaner, but my service would have been meaningless. Another would have taken my position, would have documented the same specimens, would have provided the same analysis. My suffering would have been purely personal, serving no one, changing nothing. At least as complicit participant, I carried the burden with care, with anguish, with remaining humanity that made each compromise painful. That is the only comfort I have found. Not that I was right, but that I was careful. Not that the system was just, but that I served it as humanly as impossible circumstances allowed. Not that truth was less valuable than faith, but that someone had to choose between them, and I was willing to bear that choice, rather than pass it to another who might care less about the weight. The newest specimen arrived yesterday, sample designation GS2409 Sigma. Neurological tissue from an orc killed on Armageddon by the Black Templars after a campaign spanning 26 years. The skull measures 6,200 cubic centimeters, larger than any previously documented case. Preliminary analysis suggests the creature may have existed for over 4 centuries. 400 years of continuous warfare, learning, adapting, growing. 400 years of becoming something that challenged everything doctrine claimed about Xenos' inferiority. I will document this specimen with the same precision I have brought to every analysis for 5 decades. I will note the unprecedented neural development, the evidence of advanced cognitive capacity, the implications for understanding Orkoid potential. I will file my report under Obsidian-level classification, ensuring it informs strategic planning while remaining hidden from broader dissemination. I will contribute to the machinery of managed truth one more time, as I have contributed thousands of times before. And I will lie awake tonight, as I have lain awake for decades, thinking of the soldiers fighting on Armageddon and across 1,000 other battlefields, thinking of them dying with confidence in human supremacy, never knowing that their enemies might be learning from every battle, might be planning with intelligence approaching human levels, might be building something that approaches civilization in its most brutal form, thinking of the faith that sustains them and the lies that preserve that faith and my role in maintaining both. I am 71 years old. I have served the Imperium with distinction for nearly 5 decades. I have documented truths that must never be widely known. I have been complicit in a system that sacrifices honesty for faith, knowledge for certainty, individual conscience for collective survival. I have never known if this was right. I will die not knowing. But I know this: the orcs that live long enough become intelligent. They become dangerous not just through size and numbers, but through learning and adaptation and something approaching strategic thought. They prove that Xenos are not inherently inferior, merely usually short-lived, and that given time they can become threats that challenge humanity's supremacy. This is truth. This is what I have spent my life documenting and suppressing. And I know this: if that truth were widely shared, faith would crumble. Soldiers would hesitate. Questions would spread about what else doctrine lied about. The machinery of sacrifice that sustains the Imperium would falter. Humanity might tear itself apart more efficiently than any external enemy could manage. This is why truth must be managed. This is the calculation that justifies my complicity. These two truths exist in tension, irreconcilable, demanding choice between honesty and utility, conscience and service. I chose service. I chose to be useful rather than pure, necessary rather than righteous. I carried the burden rather than refusing it. Whether that choice was right, I will never know. Whether it was necessary, I believe but cannot prove. Whether it was worth the cost, history will judge, long after I am forgotten. I am Matthias Kell. I served as senior xenobiological analyst for the Ordo Xenos for 48 years. I documented evidence that challenged fundamental imperial doctrine. I suppressed that evidence for what I believed was humanity's survival. I was complicit. I was necessary. I was damned by my usefulness. And if you are reading this, if you have somehow accessed these sealed records, if you have clearance sufficient to see what I documented and suppressed, then you face the same choice I faced 50 years ago. You can carry this burden with care and anguish and remaining humanity. You can refuse it and preserve your conscience while serving no one. Or you can try to spread this truth and watch faith crumble and wonder if your honesty killed more people than my lies ever did. I do not envy you that choice. But someone must make it. Someone must decide what knowledge serves humanity and what knowledge destroys it. Someone must be willing to compromise, to lie, to suppress truth for what they believe is the greater good. Someone must carry this weight. The emperor protects, they say. I prayed he did. I prayed my service was righteous, even when it demanded unrighteous methods. I prayed that preserving humanity's faith was worth the cost of honesty. I will die not knowing if those prayers were answered, if my service mattered, if my compromises were justified. But I served. I carried the burden. I was useful in the only ways impossible circumstances allowed. That will have to be enough. The archive maintains temperature at 4 degrees Celsius. 24,000 specimens and growing. Evidence of truths carefully managed. Someone will continue this work after I am gone, will document new specimens, will provide new analyses, will make the same impossible choices I made. The system will continue because it must, because humanity survives through faith, and faith requires certainty, and certainty requires someone willing to manage what truth is shared and what truth is suppressed. I was that someone. For nearly 5 decades, I was complicit in preservation through deception, useful through compromise, necessary through my willingness to carry weight that others refused. I do not know if I was right. I will die not knowing, but I know the truth about what happens when an orc lives too long. I know what they become. I know what it means for humanity's claims of supremacy. I know why that knowledge must be carefully managed and selectively shared. And I know that this knowledge will outlive me, preserved in archives at 4 degrees Celsius, documented with precision by faithful servants who will face the same choices I faced and make the same impossible compromises I made. The truth will persist, carefully hidden, serving in shadows, while lies serve in the light. The emperor protects. I believed that once. I want to believe it still. I served in that faith, even when faith became complicated by knowledge, when protection required deception, when service demanded complicity, Whether that service was righteous, I leave to judgment beyond my own. I am Matthias Kell. I documented truth and suppressed it. I served the Imperium by lying to it. I was complicit, necessary, damned. And I would make the same choice again. Because someone must, and better it be someone who understands the cost.